There we go. You can continue.
As authorized by the Elections Commission's February 15, 2023 vote, members of the public may attend the meeting to observe and provide public comment either at the physical meeting location or remotely. Details and instructions for participating remotely are listed on the Commission's website and on today's meeting agenda. Public comment will be available on each item on this agenda. Each member of the public will be allowed 3 minutes to speak, 6 minutes if you are online with an interpreter. When providing public comment, you are encouraged to state your name clearly. Once your 3 minutes have expired, staff will thank you and you will be muted. Please direct your comments to the entire commission and not to a specific commissioner. When joining by phone, you will hear a beep when you are connected to the meeting. You will be automatically muted and in listening mode only. To make a public comment, dial *3 to raise your hand when your item of interest comes up. You will be added to the public comment line and you will hear, "You have raised your hand to ask a question. Please wait until the host calls on you." The line will be silent as you wait your turn to speak. If at any time you change your mind and wish to withdraw yourself from the public comment line, press *3 again and you will hear the system say you have lowered your hand. When joining by WebEx or a web browser, make sure the participant's side panel is showing. At the bottom of the list of attendees is a small button or an icon that looks like a hand. Press the hand icon to raise your hand. You will be unmuted when it is your time to comment. When you are done with your comment, click on the hand icon again to lower your hand. In addition to participating in real time, interested persons are encouraged to participate in this meeting by submitting public comment in writing by 12 p.m. on the day of the meeting to elections.commission@sfgov.org. It will be shared with the commission after this meeting has concluded and will be included as part of the official meeting file. Thank you, President Stone.
Thank you, Secretary Davis. I guess. Will you proceed with item 1, commission roll call?
President Stone.
Present.
Vice President Parker.
Here.
Commissioner Bernholz.
She has an excused absence.
Okay. Commissioner Dye.
Here.
Commissioner Lavolsi.
Here.
Commissioner Wong.
Present.
President Stone, with 5 members present and accounted for, you have a quorum.
Thank you. The San Francisco Elections Commission acknowledges that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors and relatives of the Ramaytush community and affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. That closes agenda item number 1. We'll now move to agenda item number 2, general public comment. Public comment on any issue within the Elections Commission's jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
There are no hands raised.
That closes agenda item number 2. I'm actually going to move to agenda item number 4 and not address agenda item number 3, as I did not complete have the meeting minutes posted for the last month. We'll get the draft posted after this meeting, and we will review them at the next meeting in May. So agenda item number 4, Director's Report, discussion and possible action regarding the April 2024 Director's Report. I will hand it over to Director Arntz.
Thank you, President Stone. Just a few items, I guess, to add to my report. We have received, I think, 3 or 4 state petitions the last several days. We had one on Friday, had 28,000 signatures, which we had to do the raw count and start the random count. We've got another one coming on Friday, so that time frame is hit, and we'll expect more petitions to be coming our way. And then also, we met with the school district's communication group last week, I think it was, and we'll start to move content through that office, hopefully to the administrators and also to the parents in the near term. And I think from there, I can take any questions based on my report. I'll be talking later on too.
Thank you, Director Ernst. Open the floor for questions. Vice President Parker.
Thank you as always for the report. Just a couple of questions. I was interested in the item about debriefings that you've had with ballot and voter information pamphlet, translation, production, assembly, mailing vendors on lessons learned. And I just wondered, is there anything of note worth sharing, or are they just, not very exciting? But is there anything interesting to share on the lessons learned that would be interesting for us?
No, you always review the process and determine if you can do something better. So there's nothing unique in that approach. And then for November, we expect just so much content to be in the voter information pamphlet and also on the ballot. So we're already strategizing how to handle the content and within the timeframes we have to meet for the deadlines. So no, there's nothing exciting or unusual. It's just it's a process we undertake after every election, and just the scope, the larger scale of the upcoming November election makes the planning even more necessary, because we have to make sure that we hit our milestones in time as we go through the election cycle.
Thank you. Then I was also wondering if you happen to know how many folks in San Francisco qualify for the non-citizen voting, because I saw all of the notes there. Do you know offhand how many qualify?
I don't think anyone knows.
Okay.
Actually, I don't know, and I've never been given a number, and no one's really provided a number to me. I don't know how we would ascertain the number. When non-citizen voting first was moving through its process to be approved in San Francisco, there was a number of around 30,000 that was put out there, but I don't know what the basis was for that total. But no, I don't have a number of potential registrants for non-citizens.
Okay. And do you remember how many voted in the last election?
November 2022.
Yeah.
I think between 1 and 200, I believe.
Okay.
Point of clarification, also ahead of the 2022 midterm, I believe that there was a lot of litigation back and forth leading up, like right before that. And so I also think I want to make sure like it doesn't necessarily demonstrate a lack of like effort or work of the department, because I think there was a lot of confusion for non-citizen voters around that time as well. Although you could certainly speak to that better than I could, just knowing, I think it was like 3 weeks or a month right before the election. Is that correct? That it finally was decided?
Right. And
sorry to interject, but wanted to add that.
No, that's great. Thanks. And we never stopped planning. We actually continued the planning, and we couched our outreach accordingly, because we didn't know what the outcome would be. But we thought if there was a change at the ballot level, then we wanted to make sure that people were ready to, and we were ready to one, accept the registrations and to conduct the election. So, but there likely will be a higher number of voters for the presidential general election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recall that also. Thanks for raising that, President Stone. Okay, thank you. And then 2 other quick things. I just, was glad to see again kind of the new approach with the Go Green effort, and just, I guess, actually wanted to, us as commissioners, President Stone encouraged us to put a lot of links in our own email signatures, about voter registration and such. And I just wanted to encourage us all to put the Go Green links in our signatures and to promote that. And so just wanted to encourage us to do that. And I also wondered, because I don't know the logistics for this, Does the department or can the department ever do text message campaigns to folks about opting in, or do we not have, are there permission issues related to those kinds of lists? Because I know obviously we do, people can get texts about where their ballot is in the process, but I don't know that that actually opts them into any other communication.
Yeah, so voters opt in, like you say, for the ballot related messages. We've just started the text messaging approach to sending out information. So I don't know if we'll be doing messaging through text for November. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Okay.
So
I suspect that that could be something useful for these kinds of campaigns where it's just, oh, it's on my phone. I'm going to click a, a button. So if, we're not ready for that yet, that's understandable, but it might be something to consider for the Go Green effort, especially if folks who are on their mobile devices are probably more likely to also opt into something like that. I suspect. No evidence, but I suspect. All right, thank you. And then just last thing, I just wanted to comment that I appreciated the focus of the upcoming RFPs on both the non-citizen voting and the ranked choice voting. I've been thinking about both of those a lot lately and the need for communication and outreach. And I just maybe want to flag, like maybe I'll reach out to you and meet and share some thoughts or something we can talk about in a future meeting. But those are both of high interest to me to talk with communication efforts around those. And that's all.
Thank you, Vice President Parker. Commissioner Wong.
Thank you, Director Arns. I really enjoy reading the report. It's really detailed. And kind of going along, Commissioner Parker, what you just talked about, non-citizen voting. I'm really happy to see the effort of already planning for outreach and media outreach. And then you mentioned that there have been some media outreach with SFEC media, and I saw that it's especially with Spanish language, SFEC media, and this is something that we can talk about to see if we already have covered other SFEC media such as Chinese and Filipino media will be great to do non-citizen voting outreach especially, but we can talk more about that. But I'm just really happy to see some planning going into it. And the other is more so like a comment about how to do outreach about non-citizen voting. And from my work experiences, one barrier preventing immigrants' parents from registering and actually voting during those elections is one huge concern about naturalization application, right? As we already understood, during the naturalization application, they ask you about whether or not you have ever voted or registered to vote, which in the case of San Francisco, you're allowed to do so. So usually people don't really understand. And there will be some, information spread among the communities that you should not register. This is going to negatively impact your naturalizations, and thus, right, that impacts the registration rate. And this is something that I come across with all the time, basically, prior to my time on the Elections Commission. So one thing we can talk about, actually, I'll review the Elections Commission, the Department of Elections website on non-citizen voting is really detail-minded. But we can maybe think about how to spread that information more clearly about the legality of this issue. And from my understanding, this is something that I want to check with Director Arns, is that after voting, immigrants' parents can actually request a letter from the Department of Elections, to make sure that basically the letter can prove that they are legally allowed to vote on school board elections. And they can take that letter with them. That's my understanding that I want to check with you. Going into the naturalizations interview, if, a USCIS officer asks about that. So I think that's something that people don't usually know. And it would be great to include that on the website and be more clear about that so people feel more comfortable doing that. Yeah, so just want to provide that comment.
thank you.
Yeah. And we can talk more about that too, if this is also your understanding. Okay. And the other thing I want to also comment is, and also maybe for future follow-up, I'm really pleased to hear that the department staff have been currently reviewing and updating information related to language preference identified by voters. I'm really excited to hear that. I think that would be really important and relevant for, the outreach planning moving to our presidential elections. So, once the system is updated, I would love to learn more about that data. And it would be great if, Dr. Arns, you could also include that on the report so everyone can see that, including the public. Yeah, just a request, for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong. Commissioner Volsi.
Yes, My question is, Director Arntz, is more of a legal question, and maybe our DCA can answer that question. We are a sanctuary city. Are we prohibited from requesting information about non-citizen residents in the city? Can we go to the U.S. Immigration Department and get that information, because they would know who is a non-citizen resident who's able to vote? Is that something that we could do legally, despite our sanctuary city status?
Deputy City Attorney Brad Rusty. I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
Because we are a sanctuary city, would it prohibit us from going to the U.S. Immigration Department to find the number of residents that if they have record, what they know about how many people would be eligible to vote in San Francisco who are non-citizen residents, to actually get that number?
So the sanctuary ordinance prohibiting with the federal
Cooperating.
government in terms of immigration enforcement. So this doesn't sound like an issue under the sanctuary ordinance, but I don't know whether they would give us that information or whether it's available or anything about that.
Okay. So it doesn't prohibit. I thought it wouldn't, but I wanted to make sure. Would that be something, Director Arntz, that you would be interested? Because I would also love to know the number of people who are eligible to vote.
We can contact agencies and ask, but it's also not a matter of being a non-citizen. It's also having a child of 18 years or 19 years and younger living in San Francisco. So there's other criteria besides the adult having residency in San Francisco. And it applies not just to parents, but to caregivers and to guardians. So we can certainly reach out and see if it's an avenue where we get information.
Okay. I think that could be helpful to get a start, to get a sense. I understand that the law is more comprehensive, but that could be a place to find at least some of the data that Commissioner Parker was asking.
Sure.
Because I'm also interested as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Dye, you can go first, and then Commissioner Wong, just because she hasn't gone yet. Okay, great. Thank you. Your mic is off.
I'm going to channel Commissioner Parker here and ask about the high school voter education weeks. Your report mentions you've received 24 applications. Does everyone who apply automatically get accepted?
Yeah, so for this go around and also for November, whoever applies to be an ambassador will be part of the ambassador program. It's a little different this time too, since we just coming out of the March election, we had ambassadors prior to the March election, which were separate from the high school election education weeks. But yeah, so everyone who requested to be part of the program is a part of the program currently.
And I'm kind of curious, it's a 24 applications from 10 high schools. Does it tend to be the same high schools, or are you getting some kind of diversity among the high schools?
And usually the larger high schools are where we get the most volunteers. I have to get back to, I've not tracked the high schools over the years, so compared to the number of ambassadors. So I can't really give you an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if there's, kind of more targeted outreach so that we can get a diversity of high schools represented, and also because, we have obviously pockets of population in the city that are concentrated around those high schools, and they may be target populations for us that are underrepresented, that there might be some more effort to actually really recruit at certain high schools, as opposed to just waiting for people to volunteer, because that tends to, attract, schools from a certain socioeconomic demographic. Just a suggestion. I don't know what is actually done. If it's very proactive, where you just kind of put the word out and then whoever applies,
Yeah, we try to be as proactive as possible, and we go to as many high schools as we can to get the word out about this. And now that this program has been ongoing now for several years, both the administrators and the instructors know that elections has the ambassador program. So there's probably a little bit easier now actually to recruit or to have people join the program than it was initially. And certainly we can look at where we've had previously to do more outreach at certain schools. Certainly, we'll look at that and consider that, sir.
Great. I think it's a fabulous program. Thanks.
Commissioner Wong?
Yeah, I just have a quick response to Commissioner Vosey's comment on like requesting information on like eligible immigrants' parents in non-citizen voting. I think the two other avenue that we can look at it. One is SFUSD, the school district. I wonder if they are already doing similar research on like learning because that's their people that they served. So I wonder if they have such information that we can request, and then it will be more direct because it's not exactly to Director Arn's point. It's not just about being non-citizen, but also having a child enrolled in public school and other schools in San Francisco.
I don't think we'll get information regarding students from the school district.
Right, privacy. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Just wondering about that. The other thing that I'm thinking about is a collaborative called Immigrants Parents Voting Collaborative. They are kind of like a nonprofit grassroots coalition that have been working in this issue for a long time. So I wonder if they also have similar, more updated, because they have been doing constant research on this topic. That said, I don't know for sure. I just learned that Department of Elections actually collaborate with the coalition, and they because they have been doing the outreach on the ground. I wonder if they have similar or at least some references for us. So just a thought. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wong. I had a couple of comments. I was going to mention I would be surprised if SFUSD would share that private information. It's also very, very sensitive, but I think working with the schools is probably a good avenue of information giving, and not just seeking, but outreach with SFUSD and perhaps the coalition that Commissioner Wong mentioned. A couple other items I just wanted to touch on. Thank you, Director Arntz, for sharing the legislation draft for AB 1416. I think it's really helpful for folks to read, and I found it very helpful to read, actually. And no, we've talked about this in previous meetings, but it's really helpful to see it laid out and also see what the supervisors will be reviewing. I just wanted to ask the status. You talked about 3 to 4 state petitions in the last couple of days. I'm just curious a status if you have a sense of length of ballot cards at this point. I mean, I know it's super early, so. Okay.
Yeah, I can't.
No worries. And then I had I had written down a couple of dates based on previous conversations. Would you say the week after August 9th is when we would be able to get a sense from you, like as the last cutoff of whether or not you will move to opt out? So I think you had said E88.
Yeah, E88 is the primary deadline for nominations and also for district measures. We'll get the local measures before 88 days before, which I don't know what date, August 7th.
I think sorry, I should have just said E88. It's August 9th.
August 9th, okay.
Would you mind talking into the?
Oh, August 9th?
Yeah.
Yeah, so August 9th is one of the, I guess, primary deadlines for the election in November. We'll know the number of candidates by then. We'll know the number of local measures by then. We won't have potentially all of the information that would go on the ballot by then, but we'd have a good sense of where we are. And yeah, and I can't foretell what we'll have at that point, but that's when the majority of the information should be in our possession.
Yeah, I vaguely recall you shared with me that ballot formatting and the state measure translations won't yet be complete by E88. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be just, but I think you had mentioned between E88 and E73 is when you could probably notify us that whether or not you would have to opt out. And therefore, we would have time to be able to discuss it if we want to. Obviously, at that point, I think, well, not obvious. Let me take a step back. I think you had mentioned between E88 and E73 was when we would basically have, you would notify us. And then the second piece I wanted to say is thank you for the collaboration on this. Specifically, I know this has been something we've talked about for about a year or so. And I know that this is an effort. I know you put additional effort into this. Advocates had also asked us to explore this issue. It was an area of interest for me as well. And so I want to say thank you for putting the effort into it and for the collaboration. And I'm hopeful that this is the best resolution that doesn't overburden the department and also serves the interests of the public. So just wanted to say thank you for that. One question I had about registrations, because it's still awesome to see what the department is able to do in the course of even just a month. But it occurred to me when I was reviewing it that I'm not sure how many folks are actually removed from the voter rolls. I know that there's a specific process, pretty robust, that you and your team do, but that also you have to communicate with the Secretary of State because we have our own voter registration, our voter roll system in California. We're not on ERIC. So I'm just curious how many folks are going off the rolls, because if we're thinking about new registrations, but we're not thinking about who's coming off of the rolls, it may influence ultimately the way I think about things when we get to November. What is the net increase? Not that I'm asking you for the net increase, I just wanted to share my thinking behind it. Do you know generally by month or quarter, what the average amount of folks who are removed from the rolls would be? Not that many.
I don't. Yeah, it also depends on the category too. I think, if someone moves, there's less interest in that versus if someone passes away. And we'll have to look at some numbers. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I asked you totally on the spot. No problem at all. I think mostly just the general idea of, is it a significant percentage of the number of folks compared with the number of folks that we are adding to the roll? That's kind of where my head was at. So I may ask about that again in the future, not necessarily by month, but just perhaps by election year, by quarter, something a little bit broader. That's it on my end with the director's report, but thank you again for putting this together and for the ordinance. Anyone else? Okay. Anything else from you, Director Ernst? Okay. Let's move to public comment.
Okay, we have a call-in user, 619. Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, give me a minute to set the timer for you. Hold on.
Thank you.
Oops.
Okay, you're ready to go.
Thank you. My name is Brent Turner. I was originally calling for public comment, but for some reason my *3 trying to raise the hand didn't operate properly. So I will just respond to the director's report and say thank you to Director Arntz for giving comment regarding the report. Regarding RFPs coming up for ranked choice voting, I just wanted to make comment that I think it's fairly elementary and probably well understood by this Elections Commission, but you should not have ranked choice voting without open source software being involved for, I think, obvious reasons. With ranked choice voting on top of a proprietary software, the problems integral to the proprietary software are exacerbated. I wanted to thank this commission for its previous work, regarding open source. We were not successful in San Francisco. for a multitude of reasons. But thanks to your work, Mississippi now has 5 counties using the systems that Voting Works was glad to gift to the city and county of San Francisco, but unfortunately that gift was again rejected. New Hampshire is also following suit and going with the work done in San Francisco for their open source voting machines. And we hope that San Francisco reconsiders establishing a relationship with Voting Works, and the Secretary of State will then, I think, follow suit, which will be helpful to the state of California, recognizing we already had $300 million allocated to Los Angeles County that also went down the drain and was not successful. But thanks to this good commission, the work is taking hold in other states and counties, and we hope that you keep it in mind as you move forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
There are no further commenters.
Thank you, Secretary Davis. That closes agenda item number 4. We'll now move to agenda item number 5, Commissioners' Reports. Discussion and possible action on Commissioners' Reports for topics not covered by another item on this agenda. Meetings with public officials, oversight and observation activities, long-range planning for commission activities and areas of study, proposed legislation which affects elections, and others. I will open it to commissioners. All right, well, while I wait to see if hands come in, I'll just talk about the item that the attachment that I included on the packet, and one other item. I'll start with the other item first. So in the last meeting, Vice President Parker brought up the performance evaluations for the director and the secretary, and we had discussed where the status of that was. And so I did some digging and I looked through the documents. I also looked at where it landed with DCA Flores, and she did have the opportunity to review those documents already. And upon my review, I think that the process needs to be significantly simplified. And I am planning to kick off that process in the May meeting. We had originally in those documents slated having it start in May, though there were other requirements that had timeline, like months out, other steps that Commissioner Jordanek had suggested. And I think it just adds a lot of complication. No shade on him, but I just think we can do it a little simpler. So I'm going to kick that off as a agenda item in our next meeting. I'm going to share that process and start opening it up with the director and the secretaries. And then the other item I just wanted to touch on was the elections group media guide, just to keep the conversation going about communicating with the media ahead of November. So the elections group it's a nonpartisan organization of former election officials who work to really advance election administration, the profession. They develop and share resources, best practices, tools. And so this is a really kind of rudimentary media guide with reporting tips and ideas and links to resources. But I'd like for us to keep talking about this as a commission, how we can continue to empower the media to report properly on the results and also the counting process. So really just to kind of keep a conversation flowing and keep inspiration going. Curious if anyone has any other thoughts. I think there was also another association, I think it was NASED, did a recent webinar on what happens after ballots are cast. And so I'll continue to share those resources as I see them so that we can, as a group, keep an eye on that and see how we can support the department. Those are my two items to share. Any other commissioners? Okay, let's move to public comment.
No public comment.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Davis. That closes agenda item number 5. We're going to move to agenda item number 6, the March 5, 2024 primary election review, discussion and possible action on the March 5th, 2024 consolidated statewide primary election. And obviously all of the associated reports from the director. So I'll hand it over to you unless you don't have comment. But.
Well, I think the election was free, fair, and functional. And I think that the department did a really good job in conducting the election. We had a year and a half off between elections. So certainly it's like kind of learning to walk again in some ways when you have to have a long layoff. But I think we did a good job. And I think it was a good election for us to conduct as far as complexity and size and scale in relation to getting ready for November. And that's kind of, we've mostly completed our debriefing meetings internally and externally on the March election. We've already begun planning for November. But to get back to the March election, I do think that was free, fair, and functional. I think that we met our responsibilities, and I think we provided really good support and services to not just to the voters of San Francisco, but to the residents of San Francisco. And I can take any questions or comments.
Commissioner Dye.
Director Arntz, I'm curious if you had noticed any trends or have any comments on the incidents that were reported. It seemed like people were running out of I voted stickers, and provisional, envelopes seemed like the most common things. I was glad to see there were not any, violent incidents or anything like that. It seemed like outside of the normal kind of technical issues that we see in every election. Those are the two things that kind of stood out at me. Yeah, I don't know if you have your thoughts on it.
The provisional envelopes. Yeah, voted stickers. We moved to the new sticker for the March election. The genesis behind those calls was the previous I voted sticker rolled for 500 count, and the new voted stickers were 100. And the difference wasn't really, so we won't have the issue going into November's or number of stickers going to the polling places.
Plus, maybe they were in hot demand.
Well, also people who send the iVoter in the vote by mail back packets to each voter. I think also people were asking for more than so that means they just didn't. And other than those two items, those were the main topics that even caught my attention. There was nothing. Did you say violence? Did you say violent incidents?
No, I was saying, I'm glad to see there weren't.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there was no, electioneering was minimal.
Yeah.
For this. We'll have more electioneering for November. This could be a potential issue to deal with. But no, this was a good election. I think we did a good job, and I think we were resourced well, and I think we implemented the resources well, and I think I think like I said, I think we provided really good services to both the voters and to San Francisco. So.
It did look like just percentage wise, there was an uptick in the last couple of elections for provisional ballots. Is that just because of, people changing precincts or?
Well, for the primaries, because of the party cards mattered as far as who people could vote for. If there was a presidential candidate. So that was the reason for this election. For November 2022, a lot of the get out the vote efforts focus on getting people to polling places, specific polling places as large groups, and that's why you'll have a run on provisional voting at certain precincts, but not at the precincts around that precinct that experienced high provisional voting. So no, I don't think there's a common theme for the past few elections, and we will see more provisional voting for November than we saw in March.
Right.
So.
And then I just wanted to thank you for all of the nice graphs, and I want to thank Commissioner Jordanek for making the requests, but thank you for putting all that data together. And just to note that, some of this data I had also put in my memo last month, because members of the public would like to see this too, that some of this trend data is really interesting. Did you have any thoughts on, for a while we had been seeing, very high vote by mail, 95% in many cases, and now we're starting to see a little more in person. Any speculation on that?
No, I can't speculate on why voters would choose to go to polling places versus vote by mail.
Okay.
The main thing that we do is make sure that the service is available to voters.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dye. Vice President Parker.
Thank you. I had one clarifying question, and that was, it's on the provisional ballot chart that you had. And there's the note about the vote by mail. Let's see, let me look at the actual chart and see what it says. It's in the challenged section, and it says vote by mail ballot was received and counted. And I just wanted to clarify, does that mean that because the vote by mail ballot was received and counted, and you also received the provisional ballot, that if it was not counted, means that you counted the vote by mail ballot, not the provisional ballot? Is that correct with that? Okay, I wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you. And then the other things, they weren't questions, they were just comments. This is the first elections report that I've seen as a commissioner. And so just noting a couple of things, just when I was looking at the cure rate charts, and just, it's so much work to remedy all those ballots. And so I just wanted to appreciate all of the work of the staff in doing that. That's so much follow up with individual people. I really appreciate that. And also seeing the plan for staff to do follow up with those voters to let them know how to make sure their vote is counted next time. So just wanted to express appreciation for that. And also just the transparency of an incident report. I mean, it's so long with all like little tiny things that maybe people don't care about, but to me, that kind of stuff builds trust because it's so transparent by detail, by precinct. So I really appreciate that as well. And then the other thing on that last document of charts that I thought was just interesting, frankly, was getting to see some of the voters we don't always have a lot of visibility into. For instance, the number of people voting who had intersections as their location, or who who are incarcerated, those kinds of things. We just don't see that kind of data very often. So I just appreciated that chart as well. And that's all.
Thank you, Vice President Parker. I will add, that is also something that the commission had talked a lot about in 22. Cynthia, keep me. And so that's something you're kind of teeing up a little bit, agenda item 8 as well, I think, because that was also an important item. I could not agree more. Having that insight is phenomenal. I will jump in with mine, and folks are welcome to raise their hands as well. I had a few items. So I also wanted to echo the transparency piece about the incident reporting. So actually, let me take a step back. Director Arntz, you had said that it was a year and a half from the last election, but can you remind folks how many elections you administered in the previous year?
Like 5. Yeah.
Yes. So I just want to say thanks. I know it's been kind of a crazy couple of years. And so even though you said that it was a year and a half and people are still picking it back up, I mean, it's a well-oiled machine. And so just going back to the incident report, I really appreciate these reports because not only the transparency, but also it shows how much work goes into what the department actually does on election day, the minutia of that, but also the speed of responsiveness. So one of the things that really stood out to me while I was reviewing the incident report is that in many ways, and no shade again against the police department, but in some ways, the responsiveness of the department to some of these issues across 500 poll sites is faster than calling 911 when there is an issue. Obviously, very, very different, but it's just really amazing. There were many incidents where I kind of said, whoa, this is a problem. And as I was reading the report, and then within 10 minutes resolved. And I think that's just phenomenal, really excellent, and builds trust that with the public, even if they're not reading these incidents. I think just knowing that they can show up to the poll site and if they have an issue, they can trust it will get addressed is excellent. I did not violence, but I did observe in the incident report that there was some heightened tension with voters and a couple inspectors. And so I just wanted to ask if de-escalation training is going to continue to be something the department does ahead of November. I have seen a couple there was something called, it's like de-escalation ninja. There's like something like this that I've heard from other counties that their elections, their poll workers have done. I tried to quickly Google it before I came here. It actually is called ninja. I just don't remember the first word of it. It's like verbal ninja or de-escalation ninja, something like that. Anyways, I just wanted to confirm that the department will still be doing that ahead of November to make sure folks have that tool in their toolbox.
Yeah, and we review the information and the process around de-escalation before every election. Then also the city's kind of catching up. They're going to have a broader anti-violence prevention program that departments have to implement. So that's something else that will be brought into people's purview as we go into the November cycle. So the answer is yes, and more will be added so that people will be more cognizant of the situations, what to do, and how to de-escalate.
That's awesome. Thanks. I wasn't aware of that, so really, really glad to hear that. A couple other questions. I also was really excited about the report for the commission. I know we've done that the last couple of elections, but it's just so great to see that level of data. Thank you for also including the points about the cure rate, which I had asked about last month. I appreciate it. And additionally, the background on the state law. I was curious about the number and percentage of ballots reported on election night relative to the total. And that, let me pull it up. Yes, before E-Day, on E-Day, after E-Day. I just noticed that it was slightly lower for the March election. That's not a knock on you at all or the department. I think I more just want to shine a light on it because of the media and the concerns around the media and how much it really is dynamic and fluid. But is there anything else you would add to why perhaps it's a little bit smaller relative to the total for March 24
Oh.
of mail ballots.
Primaries always have a later turnout than do other elections, the presidential primary especially. That's just how it is. In November, I mean, if there's in November 2020, there was a real push in the media to have voters return their ballots early. Of course, that was a lot of it was based on fear, though, too. It wasn't really based on sure your vote was in. So to help out the departments of elections is more make sure your ballot's counted, no one steals it, which was somewhat improper, but it helped get the ballots to us. And so we had a much higher percentage of ballots counted and reported on election night for the presidential election November 2020 than I would expect we'll have for this upcoming election, just based on the messaging that was so consistent about getting ballots early in 2020.
That's actually really helpful because I did have a question about the VBM report and how 3,000 were postmarked or received after Election Day. And that seemed kind of high to me. Did that seem high to you? No? Okay. I'm glad to have that insight. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because of 2020, that very consistent messaging. It was interesting to see that about 50%, and I think I read this correctly, granted, I'm rereading my notes, so I'm not looking back at the data itself, but that around 50% of people who voted by mail actually didn't use USPS. They dropped it off in drop boxes at poll sites or not, and least often at vote centers. Is that correct? So they were using their mail ballots, but they weren't sending them through the mail.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing is the polling places are actually growing. They're receiving more ballots through time than the post office is losing as far as volume is concerned. So, I mean, polling places still matter in San Francisco. If people aren't voting at the polling places, they're using the polling places to drop off their ballot and get a sticker. I mean, so I think for November 2024, we're going to see. We'll probably get 75 to 85,000 ballots back at the polls on election day, and that'll be our greatest single source of vote by mail ballots for the election. Will be those ballots that voters deliver to the polling places.
Thank you. That was actually exactly where I was going next, is about the relevancies of the poll sites themselves. When we've been talking about people voting by mail, I was starting to go back on the track of thinking about vote centers and the Voters' Choice Act. But then when I saw this report and so few, not so few, but relative compared with the alternatives, people weren't using the vote center to drop off their ballots. It's really interesting insight. Not that if you said, that you thought it was the best thing for the city to move to that model, I wouldn't necessarily say I disagree, but I think based on what you just said, it seems like for November and for the short term, poll sites, to use your words, still really matter. It's really, really great. I mean, it gives people the experience of voting in person, but the convenience of doing it at home. I think that's ultimately makes people feel like they're still participating in the civic process. I did have two other questions about actually three. So did any poll sites have 0 in-person voters?
I don't think so. I'm not aware of any.
Okay. But they still may have had under 10 voters in person.
There were some with late turnout as far as in-person voting. Yeah.
Wild. And then are poll workers primarily full day shifts, or do you do half day shift? Have you considered the half day, or would that just be a very kind of laborious personnel management process?
I don't have the number for the schedules versus the actual operation of the polling place. The folks who are half a day till noon or so. So in that, or they'll go out to a polling place after noon just to give someone a break or to replace someone who wants to leave. But we don't have the number of people available to us to actually have shifts at the polling places.
Makes sense. Seems like it would be very intensive to manage that. So the flex poll workers, they're basically alternates.
Right.
Do you also have alternates for the inspectors? Okay. And then the only other question I wanted to ask about was the type of analysis that the department does pertaining to the incident reporting. You had mentioned at the beginning that the department had completed its review of all of the administration of the election, but also in the incident reporting review. And so would you mind just sharing a little bit of light on what you look for in order to optimize for November?
That I personally look for?
Or just the team who's doing the review of the incident, like the analysis of the incident reporting.
So everyone who's involved in election day operations will review the incident report. And I mean, they're also reading between the lines because they know why something might have happened more, or as much as looking to see what happened at the polling places during the day. So, and then that's what other folks are doing too. Just, I mean, it's not really complicated. Just like trying to get as much information from the day as you can while the action was occurring, and then just incorporating that information in our plans going forward. So,
okay, thank you so much. Those are my questions. Any other commissioners? I move that we designate the March 5th, 2024 primary election as free, fair, and functional.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Dye. Anyone else? Let's move to public comment.
Mr. Turner, are you there?
Yes,
Hello?
can you hear me?
Yes, can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
can hear
thank
you.
you, and thanks for allowing public comment on this item. I just wanted to make a couple comments regarding, the normalization of this escalation of violence and all that. That was the reason we tried to get in front of this issue before 2016, which obviously was the election that raised the eyebrows, not the 2020, which seemed fairly regular. But the 2016 was not regular, according to our intelligence folks on doing national security. So the public trust is the key to avoiding escalation, and then you don't have to focus so much on de-escalation. I think because of Trump, there's been a focus on paper ballot management that may or may not be relevant, but the folks that storm Capitol buildings and all that, they haven't really gotten to the software issue. We're hoping to remove that issue, and that was the reason since early in the 2000s, we focused on San Francisco to lead regarding open source elections. We felt like we could have avoided the 2016 issues by having tighter systems in the swing states, but we didn't get there, unfortunately. And now I think as we see the world is suffering the consequence. So again, I implore you to keep the good work toward the upgrade of the election system software. Keeping it relevant in San Francisco will help lead the state, which then will expedite that effort throughout the country. Unfortunately, Director Arnst has been adverse to that progress, that security upgrade. And the incident reports are good, that we know the flaws and the problems, but it doesn't necessarily lead to betterment of the situation. And that, I think, should be noted. Also, there was mention that why would voters trend toward in-person? I think communities of color historically have been hesitant to trust the post office, although I think they do deserve trust. But that may be a reason with the press pushing that issue sort of triggers that response. And I think that's about it.
Thank you.
That was the only comment.
Thank you, Secretary Davis. Let's move to a vote, roll call vote on the motion to designate the March 5th primary 2024 primary election as free, fair, and functional.
President Stone,
Yes.
Vice President Parker,
Yes.
Commissioner Byrne, what's on here? Commissioner Dye,
Aye.
Commissioner LaVolsi,
Yes.
Commissioner Wong.
Yes.
Okay,
Motion passes. Great. Thank you, Director Coons, on a free, fair, and functional election. Looking forward to November. That closes item number 6. Let's move to item number 7, translation of candidates' names into Chinese characters. Discussion and possible action pertaining to the Department of Health and characters. Just before we dive into this, a couple of quick comments. So last meeting, we had a candidate for supervisor in public agenda. So DCA advised us that if we plan to discuss the matter, it should be properly agendized. And so that is why it is on the agenda for today. One item I want to just mention that are address a specific candidate, there. And as kind of additional context, I included all of the materials that the director has but all of the materials over the last, I would say, I think November, I think it was in the December, January, February meetings. And so I reposted them here. In addition to a few articles that talk about this issue from a couple of perspectives, namely on the director resources. I've included the draft resolution from the Board of Supervisors initially in October, the director's response to the board's resolution in November, the proposed amendments, the California Elections Code, the declaration forms for the names given in birth that are now are used to follow the new two-year policy at San Francisco. But then also I included at the end the director's report for February, this past February, which also speaks to the director's decision and kind of process around this policy so that folks could really understand as much scope as possible. And so with that, I will open it up to conversation. It's possible, there's no pressure on us to go anywhere with this necessarily, but I do think it is worthwhile for us to follow our word when we say we want to talk about something, that we agendize it. So I will open it up to commissioners. Commissioner Wong.
Thank you, President Stone. I just want to say I really appreciate the public comments made on our last meeting, and I think it was really genuine and transparent when, the candidate shared impacts of the change of policy on her campaign, especially as a first-time candidate. But that being said, I do think that the Department of Elections has an obligation to implement and comply with AB 47, and now actually codified in the California Elections Code, that require candidates to use a Chinese character-based name for 2 years. And I'm really happy, after reviewing everything President Stone posted, that we allow flexibility for Chinese American candidates or any individuals really to use their Chinese names given at birth. I think that's very reasonable. And by submitting a declaration instead of a birth certificate or other written documents that might not be available, especially for those who are born and raised here. And I am in support of the state law, and find the 2-year requirement for non-Chinese candidates actually really reasonable for 2 main reasons. And first of all, I think it is really important to actually widely circulate adopted Chinese name for a substantial amount of time before elections, because lots of time Chinese immigrants communities, those who don't speak English fluently, got confused a lot about different names and stuff. So I think having 2 years would prevent those confusion and making sure the names are widely circulated on media, news media, or any public record. So I think that's, speak to the 2 years requirements that I found reasonable. And the other thing is that I truly value, the dedication of any first-time candidates in reaching out to Chinese-speaking communities. And as someone who served low-income Chinese immigrants every day, they often face a lot of discrimination and isolation in policy making and, frankly, any levels of decision making in the society. So I think, I would really recommend, really any first-time candidates investing time in understanding and meaningfully engaging with, Chinese immigrants. And this process might take, more than months to a year before officially launching a campaign, which I understand, especially hard for first-time candidates who are not in the communities. But I think the state law in general serves as a reminder that maybe we, the importance of more inclusive community engagement as a whole, especially for those who doesn't speak English, often have a harder time to understand, right, elections or engaging with candidates. So versus, kind of a quick fix to adopt Chinese names, months to a year before election. So I stood by, the state law, and I think that's incredible, the flexibility that the Department of Elections made for Chinese and Chinese American individuals. So allow them to use, given name at birth. And for non-Chinese folks, I think that definitely, compliance issues that we have to, stand by. So that's kind of my take on it. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong. Vice President Parker?
Yeah, thanks for agendizing this. And thank you also, Commissioner Wong, for all of those thoughts. I really appreciate that. And I'm very curious, right? There's such a wide range of perspectives, and I'm very interested in hearing about them. When I was reading all of the attachments, there were a few things that came to mind. One is I actually still felt a little unclear whether the state law, whether we were required to comply with the state law, because I understand the interpretation the department has had, and we have our own municipal code. And so, but I'm reading the articles, it was reported in different ways. One I think said we're required to, and so that still felt a little unclear to me. And I understand you, Director Arnst, worked with the city attorney's office to, to come up with this revision to municipal code here in San Francisco. And I appreciate and understand some of the concerns that have been brought up around cultural appropriation. I think they're really valid, and that's why, I especially want to hear from Chinese community members. And I also thought it was interesting that there are some folks who were born in China who have had issues with complying with this, and that concerns me. Even with the allowances in the adjustments that we made, are proposing to make, I guess did make, And so that came up for me. So the thing about thinking about the 2 years, there's some other thoughts I had is the 2 years, you do want to have people invest in communities. I completely appreciate that. And I suspect that 2 years was intended for state offices where people really are running for a long period of time to run for state office as opposed to local office. And I wonder about our local candidates, especially down ballot races, and thinking about what that means about access to the ballot. And, when you have other candidates who have been known for a long time, that does definitely give some preference, for voters for folks who were perhaps elected leaders before this kind of a law was in place in San Francisco, where they will just have an advantage, and so I have questions about access and equity for newcomer candidates to our ballot, and making sure there's room for folks of all different backgrounds and ethnicities. So that's a question I was wondering about. And then I think when I was reading the director's report, because I did miss the February meeting because we had changed it and I had to be away when we moved it to, have the amendments to the municipal code been submitted? They have. Okay. So those were my thoughts.
Thank you, Vice President Parker. Commissioner Dye.
Thank you, President Stone. I have expressed my opinions on this before, but I just wanted to validate what Commissioner Wong said. I completely agree with all of that. I think the purpose of the state legislation was to prevent cultural appropriation, and that was why there was a time that was imposed that the name very early on. I see it all the time with city officials, even for people who are not running for office. It's just really common in San Francisco because of the high number of Chinese speaking population we have here. I understand concerns. I think that a rule that we are have a mandate to try to create a level playing field for everyone. We would not want to inadvertently advantage incumbents, which this might be perceived as doing. But in the timing. And now that everyone knows what the rules are, people can plan for this. 2 years. Just unlucky. I don't think there was any intention of advantaging incumbents, and I think because everyone will get a Chinese name, it just may not be the one they want, right? So they'll get a clunky and a Chinese name. Put the state legislation forward. That was a reasonable way to go, is to have something that sounds as close as possible to the actual English name. And if you want to have a more, thoughtful, meaningful Chinese character-based name, then you have to plan ahead. And ideally, you're doing it because you're working with that community already, and not just because you decided to run for office. And so I do think the 2 years is reasonable, and it, I think if it were one, you would get a lot of people who just decided to do it because they were running for office. And so I think this is a good way to kind of separate candidates who are going to seriously invest in the community and are planning ahead because they want to serve that community. So I have applauded Director Arndt's changes before to make sure to accommodate, you know, the many, you know, Chinese potential candidates who like never formally registered their Chinese names. Like, you know, my parents thought ahead and made it my middle name, so it's on everything, but not everybody's parents did that. And yeah, they use it at home. They don't use it anywhere else. So why would it be out there in the media? And so coming up with reasonable ways to get around that, I thought was great, because obviously you didn't want legislation that was supposed to prevent cultural appropriation from causing a problem for people of that culture. So I think we fixed that. So I do think that it's well thought out and it's reasonable. And I think there's no intention to advantage incumbents. It's just unfortunate that some people got caught up with the change. But moving forward, everybody will know. And so I think it'll be not a problem moving forward.
Thanks, Commissioner Dye. I have a few comments. I appreciate everyone's input. I just wanted the DCA to and Director Ernst to confirm SF was not required to follow the state law up until the department was asked to implement this rule, correct?
Generally, the Municipal Elections Code governs these issues for San Francisco.
So
That's being changed now with the ordinance that the department has introduced, which
Okay,
is which is consistent with the state law.
sorry, can you repeat that? We were all having trouble. hearing.
Generally, the Municipal Elections Code governs these issues in San Francisco, and that the section that governs this question is being amended pursuant to the ordinance that the department has introduced, which will be consistent with the state law.
Okay, that was a very lawyerly answer. I think that is it's not just a very lawyerly, but also very San Francisco, in the sense that I think SF often plays its own rules and we have our own unique demographic. And so I think that's also understandable. I did have a couple of thoughts. I think I'm, very supportive, of course, of the concerns that have been raised, particularly from Commissioner. I think that we can make the assessment of what the intention was of the folks who introduced this. I don't know what's in their minds, and so I wouldn't co-sign that but I think, it is a presidential one where the candidate who introduced it is running for re-election. It doesn't mean that it's not right or wrong, but I don't think that we can know what is in her heart and mind. So I'm not saying it is her intention, but I just think we shouldn't, as a commission, jump to that conclusion. The thing I just know the answer. I think it's just, I keep hearing the term reasonable as an explanation for 2 years. And when I think about 2 years and I think about folks announcing their election, especially for first time candidates for down ballot races, supervisor, school board, et cetera, I actually think 2 years is a pretty long time now, or less than for reasonable around this specific issue of a Chinese character-based name. I personally don't know the answer and I respect there seemed to be some consensus around that I wasn't sure how we were actually defining clunky. I think these articles also, and some of the other articles that I chose not to post, talk about the great costs, which I would agree, Commissioner. No, Commissioner, that would just be part of the whenever a new policy goes into effect, is Vice President trying to capture the piece about everyone will know. I do think, and this is something that perhaps we could line, I do think it is hard to be a candidate and no thing the commission could discuss is there a way in which for first time, maybe a character-based Chinese name as opposed to transliteration item that I think is worth us discussing, but definitely I don't think everyone will know, because I think lots of candidates, folks who are running for office directly. And that's not a knock on anyone. It's just, it's hard to run. It's hard to run. And I think that's an equity issue for communities of color and for all kinds of diverse backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, just basic access to information. I think that is a barrier to ballot access for those types of candidates that we should continue to talk about. So those are my comments, and I appreciate everyone's input on this sensitive and important topic. Yes, Commissioner Dye.
DCA Rusty, I just wanted to get some clarification of your lawyerly answer. So when Commissioners LaVolsi and Parker and I were working on, redistricting reform and trying to understand, why San Francisco got accepted as a charter city, what we understood is where there were conflicts, state law takes precedence. And where the state law is silent, and we had our own special charter thing, then ours would stand. So, for example, when we were looking at AB 764 and what applied to us and what didn't apply to us, there were things we were already doing, and then there were things that were quite explicit in the state law that we had to adopt. So I just wanted to understand if it was the same thing in this case.
Commissioner, I think what you're referring to are specific provisions of those two bills where there are carve outs for charter cities in specific areas. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily apples for apples. Every state law could have a potential impact on a charter city depending on how the legislature frames it. And there's a very extensive legal analysis that might go into determining whether the city is preempted or not based on home rule authority or not.
Okay, and
Another lawyerly answer, but I can't
Yes,
give you,
no,
can't
so
give you an
I-
up or down answer for every,
yeah,
every
but
particular situation.
so for this particular situation, then, I think that was the question that Commissioner Parker was asking is, because this law passed in 2019, so did the city attorney do an analysis and decide that it didn't apply, or did it just not come up until recently?
As you know, we're in a public forum where the conversation is not privileged. So what I can say is what I said earlier. In general, the municipal election code governs our local elections unless there's a specific provision of state law that could preempt us. The Department of Elections had authority to change its policy with respect to this particular issue, which it did. And we have an elections code section, a municipal elections code section that already governed this issue before the state law. And now there is an ordinance pending with the Board of Supervisors that will make changes. So, I mean, that's basically where we're at right now. So
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Dai. Commissioner Wong.
Thank you, President Stone. I really appreciate our discussion. I think that's really helpful for me to process and also think about different perspectives. And I agree with you, President Stone, that not every, especially for first-time candidates, it's especially hard in terms of resources, funds, and access. So I want to acknowledge that for sure. And I actually agree with you, like moving forward, if we can work on how to support first-time candidates, especially in terms of information sharing, to augment accessibility, making sure we can, as much as possible, support people that are not well known as some of our non-time politicians would be helpful, and make sure our election is fair, functional, and available for everyone, not just those who have more resources already, and we don't need that, So I definitely want to acknowledge that. And then I agree with Commissioner Dai saying that, when law change, unfortunately, some individuals caught up in those change of law, and it is indeed a very unfortunate situation. And also think that the intentions of people adopting Chinese some of the time is very genuine, but it's just that at the same time, going back to the intention of, why to change this policy, in the middle of the elections. I agree with you, President Stone, we can't speculate, nor do I want to speculate the intention, but I think it's important to also provide some context. As I was reading everything, that you also shared, some incidents occurred when first name had been literally the same and similar between a Chinese and a non-Chinese candidates. And, I read Chinese, I actually read the translation. It is indeed very confusing because the first name is exactly the same. The only difference is the last name. But it is confusing enough, actually, when you look at the ballot, for me even. It took me, honestly, 30 seconds to think who is which. So I'm native in traditional Chinese. Just want to flag that, as a perspective, that's why I'm a little concerning about the 2 years timeline when I said, I think substantial amounts of time, however we define it, has to pass for people to actually understand, for monolingual folks to identify who, they're talking about, right, on the ballot. And that incident, I think, from what I read on the news, I can't really say for sure, prompt, the discussion of, this new change of policy. I think that's the backdrop. Why, the intention, again, I can't speculate and I don't want to, but that's kind of what really caught my eyes when I first talked about it with community members and myself when I read, the names, and it is indeed confusing. So I think that's part of my concern about my first point. enough time has to pass for adopted Chinese name to be widely circulated. I don't know how that look like for first-time candidates, unfortunately, but then I think if, people want to engage with Chinese communities, it should start like earlier in terms of not just the elections campaign, in terms of neighborhood work, in terms of community work and engagement. That's why, I was going back to my comment about, it is in general maybe a reminder of a more inclusive community engagement. Like I actually work at a Chinese American organization. Some of my coworkers are not Chinese, but because they do the work they do, community members actually gave them names. They adopted that names, and then it's not on news media per se, but it was widely circulated on documents or when they text each other. I don't know how that looked like in terms of policy. I'm just sharing, a community perspective that is acceptable. And me as a Hong Kong Chinese person, I find it completely fine. I don't see that as a cultural appropriation per se, but it is really about the background, the story, the connection with the communities, which that's why I'm saying the 2 years, I think, is reasonable, not as in just on news media, which is very hard for first-time candidate. I want to acknowledge that. But for the community work, that your name is well known, or your adopted Chinese name, that's how people call you when they see you on the street, when you work for, or volunteering at a church, or, working at a food bank on a weekend, like, however that looks like for you in terms of community work. And I think that's more where I'm coming from in terms of investing time with the communities in a meaningful way. And it is a, issue that deeply personal to me, but then also because I work with folks, and then, sometimes they will come up to me talking about confusion about languages. That's why I have specific concern about that when I read the incidents on the news about like 2 names that got confused. So yeah, just want to flag that as a background information.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you touching on my specific question about reasonableness. I think that's helpful and informative. Any other comments? Let's move to public comment.
Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Jen Nosikoff. I spoke last time. It's nice to see you all again. Thank you so much for prioritizing this. And I'm so grateful for the time you've spent researching this and thinking about this and sharing your thoughts. I want you to know I have been, when I first moved to the neighborhood, one of the things that I did was my mom always taught me to volunteer. And so I volunteered. I said, how can I help the community? And I've been delivering groceries for seniors, Chinese seniors, ever since we've moved to the neighborhood in 2020. It never dawned on me that I would call me Jen. For when I started campaigning last July, that I learned that the Department of Elections requires us to have a Chinese name, and they didn't let me. So that's something that should get factored into, which is if you're going to require us to have a name, if you're going to require a Chinese name for candidates to the ballot, I'd like to get that at the top file. Otherwise, I just followed precedent. And the woman who gave me the name, I had a conversation with my neighbor who's Chinese, and I said, is this cultural appropriation or is it that? And we were a little bit on the fence, and then that's when I learned we have to have a name. So great. So I had spent $2,000 of the $13,000 that I raised on my signs. I've been using this name, playing mahjong at the senior center. I brought a COVID vaccine clinic. I met at another neighborhood. By the time the election will happen in November, I will have been using it for a year and a half. And I know that not saying that the 2 years, I'm not arguing that any capacity. So if there's any way that I can appeal to have to use Gauss-Dugen on the ballot, I would greatly appreciate. So I do respect the decision. So,
Any other commenters? Comments? Commissioners? Okay, that closes agenda item number 7. We'll move to agenda item number 8, racial departments. The Department of Election Submission no later than Thursday. So the Department of, or the Office of Racial Equity has recently set the deadline for the report submission, the same that the director provided. Obviously, a few slides last year. I also attached that onto the packet, and I do have some. I have some thoughts about what we can discuss from our achievements last year. So just going to run through those, and then I'll also share some thoughts about 2024. I didn't want to come empty-handed today. So and this is not intended to be the exact wording of how we would say it. These are just the ideas that I think that we can speak to of what we've achieved in the last year. So first is that we aligned our policy priorities and our election review process from an equity lens. And this goes back to what I was saying to Vice President Parker, that the election review, the commission asked the director to include an election review that looks at communities that are often marginalized, such as those that are unhoused, using an intersection as a registration address, incarcerated, and people with disabilities. So I think that is something we should certainly talk about as it pertains to looking at results and policies. Then, of course, we completed the redistricting initiative that we also shared with leadership, elected officials across the city in an effort to improve the fairness of our districting process. And that we also completed the task to ask appointing authorities to consider diversity when there is an opening on the commission. In 2024, I think that we should talk about the increased access, or the efforts to increase access to voter registration, and also around results reporting. I think Commissioner Dye in our last meeting made some really great points pertaining to visually impaired voters and visually impaired constituents being able to understand and have access. In addition to Commissioner Wong, I believe you also raised multilingual access. And I think those are areas that we should talk about specifically and incorporate. I think that we should touch on that as our results reporting policy priority, being a lens that we are using to look through. And then, as I mentioned, voter registration. And that we also we emphasize policies and agendize policies that affect diverse racial and ethnic groups throughout the city. I think the last agenda item is a perfect example of that, that we are evaluating that lens, using that lens to evaluate potential policies of the department. So I've talked about the commission's priorities, the commission's efforts, and also kind of meeting by meeting our efforts to look through this lens in a more granular way. Like I said, these are not the specific words, but they're just general ideas to get the conversation going. And I will open it up for commissioner discussion. Yes, Commissioner Dye.
I actually think you captured it quite well. My question is, how are we going to produce it?
Oh. Would you like me to respond to that directly? Sure. Well, if folks all agree with that, or if there's an alternative or another point or something they'd like, anything else, we can obviously discuss that. I would be happy to, I think what we did last year was we had a similar discussion, though I think the wordsmithing was a little bit more granular. And I think it was a little more contentious last year. If I recall, contentious may be more charged than is really necessary, but I think that generally, if the commission is aligned with what I discussed, I would be happy to draft it. And if someone would like to designate someone to double check it before I share it off with the director, that's fine. Or if you'd like to have me just do it based on listening to the conversation in the recording, I'm also happy to just take care of it, so long as we have general alignment on what those items are. Did that answer your question? I feel like that was
Yeah, it
long-winded.
does. One other thought we had talked about, and I don't know where we left it. I was looking at our goals for 2023, and we had, or maybe it was some progress. I'm trying to figure out where it was. We had talked about doing some more to, since we obviously don't have the choice of our own composition, but we could at least be transparent about our composition. And I know we added pronouns, but I don't know that we did anything else on the website to make ourselves more transparent that way.
Yes, so I can speak to that. There are a couple of things I would say to that. One is we did look into that. It's not particularly easy to do it in an aggregated way using the actual website platform. The other thing I wanted to add is, and this is more my current feeling, that I also think we're a very small body. We're also smaller than our full, we're one commissioner short. And I think I want to leave room for sensitivity, and I don't think there's a lot of anonymity if folks aren't always comfortable disclosing certain components of their identity. In that way, I think that could be a little bit exposing. So food for thought. I personally know that there are areas of my identity that I wouldn't necessarily want to have included always in a very public way like that with such a very small group of folks. So I'm happy to speak personally in that regard. But I did look into it in a way that doing it like with pie charts and things like that, it's a little bit more tricky on the current website with how it's set up. But that answers the first part, and then the second part was more of a personal response.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it, Commissioner Day? Okay, thank you. One area of the 2023 goals that I think we could incorporate into 2024 is including community voices and conversations, particularly around voter registration as well. And so I think I'd love to continue to maybe even move that 2023 goal into the 2024 goal. I know I worked previously in the year prior on developing a lot of those relationships myself. I think it's something we can do around voter registration that I think, perhaps it's areas of interest, whether it be multilingual. I know I worked very closely with the director on system impacted folks. In fact, the one thing that's been on my mind is voter registration for the youth probation, like the youth hall, juvenile hall, not probation. So I've been talking to the director about going and supporting some voter registration initiatives there. I think that it would be a great opportunity for all of us to incorporate other community relationships into our goals as the commission around voter registration. So if people are interested in that, I'd be happy to carry that into the 2024 slide as well. Yes, Commissioner LaVolsi.
I think it's also important to think about communities that are very small populations here in San Francisco. And as part of our goals for racial equity in 2024, 2025, and looking at how those communities could be unintentionally marginalized because of their small populations. So I'd really like to think about the African American Latino populations are probably the smallest
Sorry,
demographic.
could you repeat that?
The African American and Latino populations in San Francisco are probably the smallest when you look at demographic racial breakdowns. And so just kind of looking at how the fact that they're small and how they can be impacted in access and in sometimes some people in that community, those two communities may feel they're not seen. So just kind of think about that when we think about elections and access. I think that'll be important.
President Parker.
Yeah, I think you, what Commissioner Volz just brought up, I think it is important. There's a lot of companies in there are so many, right? That we don't talk about. So it's interesting. I mean, that's a hard thing to solve because they are small. And so how do you do that? But it isn't something important to consider. I guess the only thing is just actually just the last conversation. Something that should be a commission priority is just the general, I've heard similar things that other folks have commented on about candidates understanding what they need to do in order to run. And there's part of that's not appropriate at all for the elections department to do. Like it's not in how to run a campaign. But in knowing what the requirements are, it said on the website, I don't know if this has changed in the last year or two, but for many years before that, it was there is a required training for candidates, but it was never scheduled. I'm aware of that. And so I think that there's some support there. Again, I'm not sure if it's something that's appropriate for our appropriate somewhere else or an agenda. That does affect racial communities, especially those who are smaller and maybe not as connected to people. And so I don't know.
Thank you, Vice President Parker. Yeah, it sounds like ballot access is definitely something that we've all been talking about, and equity. I see that finger, Commissioner Dye. Go for it. You don't have to click the button.
I was if President Stone, you and Vice President Parker uh, uh, work on drafting it and Commissioner Wong?
Thank you, President. Translate into a more actionable of like actively inviting that here from the perspective of registration rate or turnout rate, which indicated actually on the direct report that you can see. That would be my suggestions for your proposal. And just for the sake of like, because this has to be public and then I have to like say it, even though I've been talking about this for so many times, so bear with me about multilingual access. So I think I really, really appreciate the multilingual access of the website. Look at the Chinese translation, it was really great. Even though, the note and memo are still written in English, but at least, community members is aware of what is it on the agenda. So I really appreciate that. And they can, hopefully provide public comments with interpreters if needed. So I appreciate that. And the other piece that I think I brought up many, many times is about outreach materials and kind of just reveal the outreach materials in a culturally competent way, just to make sure, I can only speak for Chinese languages, but then we should, once again, going back to partnering with, community organization to evaluate the requirements, the 3 threshold languages under Language Access Ordinance, which is Chinese, Filipino, and Spanish, and how we engage monolingual folks in terms of registration and also what is it actually on the ballot. So I think I would love to do kind of review or working with the department on evaluating that, the LAO, the Language Access Ordinance required languages, the 3. So I think that's, the thing that I would love to include and would love to, want to make sure I just say it here in public so you can incorporate that later. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong. Commissioner Volsi.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong, for your comment. And I think it's important for us to understand that voter registration is one indicator of participation, but I think also the optics of who we are engaging with and how we're engaging are also important. Communities of color, that we're very fortunate to have a wonderful diversity in San Francisco, but I think there's a history in San Francisco that we also can't ignore, that some communities have felt not a part of the process. And so that's what I was talking about, of really making sure that in our racial equity plan, we're looking at the history, we're looking at communities broadly, and understanding that numbers do matter. If your population is only 2 or 3% of the city, that's significant, and that does not give you a lot of power. So I think that's important to just name and think about it in those terms as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Volsi. And I'll just add, I think Commissioner Wong, you probably weren't on the commission yet when yeah, no, for sure. I think it was right before you joined. Someone would have to refresh my memory when we voted on the priorities for the year. But I would be happy to share also the memo I put together on voter registration. I've done a few memos on it. I think it touches, I know it's only registration's only one indicator, but I think it touches on the element of historical components. And so I think just one way in which when we're looking at these issues, whether it's ballot access versus voter registration versus civic engagement, or just simple like access to basic voter information, I think history can easily be considered and incorporated. So happy to add that, and also happy to incorporate the support for the department, the intent, and thank you for putting it on public record so that I can go back, but just to kind of recap, support the department in the multilingual access, particularly for those 3 languages, around outreach materials and ensuring that community members have access to those materials as well. And I will obviously fill that in with the specifics that you share. It won't be word for word, but I wanted to recap the high level. Yes, Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is that part of our oversight function is making sure that racial equity lens is applied to all of the department's programs. And that's the reason I asked Director Arnst about the high school ambassador program, because, there are a lot of special targeted programs that the department does for particular underrepresented communities, but that's kind of a general high school ambassador program. But the question is, who's participating in it? What kind of outreach was done? Is it always the same schools? What are the demographics of the 24 high school ambassadors, right? I mean, so these are things, the reason I asked him those questions is that we know what parts of the city are, have low voter registration rates and lower turnout rates, and can we leverage kind of more general programs like the high school ambassador program to target those areas to try to move the needle on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Dye. Anyone else? All right. Thank you all for the lively discussion. I appreciate it. Let's move to public comment.
There are no public commenters.
Okay. That will close out agenda item number 8, and we'll move to agenda item number 9, agenda items for future meetings, discussion and possible action regarding items for future agendas. So I talked about how at the May meeting, we are going to kick off the performance review process, and that will be a separate agenda item that we will likely have to do in closed session. So if past performance is an indicator of future results, it may be a longer meeting, but I'm hopeful that the work that former Commissioner Jordanic did with support of BOPEC and through my simplification of that process, hopefully it will be kind of painless, and it should only take a couple of meetings to get through it. The other just quick announcement I wanted to make is that we have moved the June meeting to June. Well, yes, we are planning to schedule the June meeting from, because it is currently slated for what is a national holiday, we are moving it to June 5th. So hopefully folks can still make that. If you can't all of a sudden make that, just let me know as soon as possible, ideally before the end of the week, to make sure that we don't reserve the room if we're not going to have quorum, because obviously we can very quickly not have quorum with one member down. That is it on my list. Does anyone have anything they would like to add before we move to public comment? All right.
No public comment.
Oh, all right. Well, we are now moving to public comment. Still none. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. The time is now 8:04 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned.